Welcome to the Talking Tech and Talent podcast, where leaders in Australia in technology, transformation and projects drop by and share their insights. I'm your host, Tim Hutchinson, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Andy Sutton. Andy is the GM of data-driven transformation at Endeavour Group, and Endeavour's perhaps best known for its brands Dan Murphy's and BWS. Andy and I are going to explore how his team are mobilising to drive measurable growth from the data they hold, and we're also going to explore the challenges and opportunities that a large-scale transformation such as that represents. We will get into that right after this.
Welcome to the Ember Talking Tech and Talent podcast, where Australian business leaders and experts discuss the technology and talent challenges facing organisations today and the opportunities available to innovative businesses in the future. Let's get the conversation started.
Andy, absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Tim. Nice to meet you.
You will get the now obligatory virtual applause.
Do I get booing at the end?
I've probably got one somewhere. But there you go. No, it's an absolute pleasure. We've actually tried to get together a few times, and I think life got in the way, touch of COVID or
COVID's got in the way at least twice.
Your contemporary dance classes, I think, clashed with the couple of dates we had. So, but we're here now. That's the main thing. We're going to have a pretty good chat. So we're going to hear more about Endeavour Group and your role there, which you interestingly describe as a $15 billion startup. So we'll get behind that and the transformation journey that's underway. We will explore how you're mobilizing data there to drive significant measurable value and growth. And we'll also look at talent challenges, which are such a live topic in the market currently. Before all of that somewhat technical stuff, you're the main event today. So let's talk about you. Who is the Andy in front of me?
Well, that's pretty good because I think that's my favourite topic of conversation, if I'm honest, is talking about me.
Perfect.
I'm from the UK, grew up in Wales until I was 18, went to uni, started out doing analytical stuff on the tools when I was about 22, 23. And then I've kind of moved, I guess, up through the levels, as it were. Moved to Australia to work for Woolies about 5 years ago now. Recently became Australian citizens, so we're here to stay.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I've got two kids, two girls who are 16 and 14. My wife's a dentist in Kellyville in Western Sydney.
You'll be able to retire soon then, that's good.
I would hope. But doesn't seem to be part of the plan currently. Yeah. And outside of work, I run. So I may not look like it, but I'm a park runner. I run anything up to half marathons. I've done one marathon, and that's enough, frankly, to do one.
Yeah, right.
So me and my daughter...
May I ask the time?
It was just over 4.5 hours. I was aiming for 4.5, and it took slightly longer.
Yeah, right. Okay.
But
that's good. It's good.
That was 6 years ago in London. So if you're going to do one, you may as well do the best marathon in the world, I think.
Oh, well done.
And now I routinely get beaten by my 16-year-old daughter, who basically kicks my backside about once a week.
Fantastic.
When we run together. But I think running for me is an outlet, really. It's a way of coping with the stresses of work, mental health challenges. So I've had a few mental health challenges over the years with OCD, anxiety, depression. So I can probably tick off the whole list, really.
Right. Okay.
But running is the thing that keeps me grounded. I find when I don't go for a run, things get a little bit more tense.
Yeah, fantastic. And I, along with others, perhaps have seen, for example, on LinkedIn, that you are something of an advocate for mental health or mental health in the workplace, or.
I find it a lot easier to talk on LinkedIn than anywhere else, if I'm honest. So easier than having a conversation like this about it in some respects. I've talked about it in work a few times, but mainly about things that have happened in the past rather than the here and now. I do find it a lot harder to talk about the moment. So if I was off work with stress, for instance, the moment, I'd find that harder to talk about. But I do think having the conversation helps. Did
that feel like a sort of a natural progression, or was it a bit of a pros and cons, or are there pros and cons to being open about it?
So I haven't actually found any cons, if I'm honest. I've been open. So it took a while for me to be open when I first started out. And I think I'm in quite a fortunate position. I'm fairly senior, and therefore it's a lot easier to have that conversation, really, because it's almost expected is the wrong word, but it's okay to do it. Whereas when I started and I was 23 years old and having a conversation with my boss about I'm feeling depressed, that was hard. So I can see why it would be difficult.
But you're talking about 23, which was, I mean, that's what, 8 or 9 years ago.
Yeah, I wish.
There was still, I think, significant stigma to speaking out 5 years ago.
I think it depends where you are in the world as well. So I think in the UK, there's probably a more advanced conversation about mental health than in Australia, slightly more. I think, so I've taken different steps over the years. So originally it was just one-on-one with a boss. Then it became more open and I'd have the conversation in the workplace. Then on Mental Health Day, probably 2 years ago, I put it on Facebook. And that was the first time I'd really come out and told quite a few people about it. I got really good feedback and really good response. So then I kind of went, well, if I can do it on Facebook, I can probably do it with people I actually care about immensely. Then I can do it on LinkedIn with people that I work with, or maybe acquaintances. And again, it got a really good response. So I've kind of gone, well, there isn't really a downside to me for doing it. There may be a downside to other people, depending on where they are in their journey. But for me, there's only an upside. So I'm quite happy to keep doing it. And if it helps one person or two people along the way, then that's a
Well, that was my next question, whether you've seen it pave the way for others to feel able to speak out or to confide or share. Or
I've definitely had more conversations about it in the last year since I've been open and been vulnerable. And I don't really like using the word vulnerable, but since I've been more open and more vulnerable about it, people have come to me and talked about their own challenges as well.
And you strike me as already as relatively modest in one sense. So would you stop short of sort of giving advice to others who are struggling with situations or issues at all?
I'm never short of an opinion, it's fair to say, but I do kind of, I guess, balance that with, there needs to be a degree of why should anybody listen to me, really, right? I think I've got to where I've got to within all of this through luck, really. There's been a lot of hard work, right? But there's also a degree of luck involved. So like I say, I can share a story, I can share what I've done, I can share my perspective, but ultimately it comes down to the individual to kind of go, well, how do I want to take this and how do I want to move forward? And that's the same with any advice that I give through this conversation, really. It's all done from a place of, well, it's worked for me. It may not work for anybody else. It may do, but it may not.
Yeah. So in terms of, again, modestly, you say that, you've lucked into a role. Let's look at that. Let's look at the sort of the scope of your work. Now, obviously, you have a role at Endeavour Group, which you'll describe in a moment. My understanding really of the core of our conversation is the context is retailers have a huge amount of data or data, which in many cases is untapped. And it's a case of we're going to explore how you find the value in that data and what a transformation journey looks like to achieve that. But perhaps give us some backstory about EDG, which you describe as a $15 billion startup.
Yeah, so probably worth actually just describing what Endeavour Group is. So it's probably one of the biggest secret companies, I guess, in Australia, in that nobody really necessarily knows the master brand, but people will have heard of Dan Murphy's and BWS, which are our kind of two core retail brands. We also operate 300 pubs, hotels across Australia. So essentially the biggest hospitality company in Australia and potentially across the world.
I believe you came straight from one of those pubs this morning.
I did come
from a meeting.
I was not drinking at 11 o'clock this morning. I was doing a presentation. But so we're a large retailer. And around about just under a year ago, we kind of spun off from Woolworths Group. So when we talk about being a $15 billion startup, we're a large company with a large number of people, a large amount of data. But we're also new enough to be entrepreneurial and to do things in a slightly different way to what a large traditional corporate would do. The way the business works is based around hospitality, is based around having fun. You want your customers to have fun and you want your teams to have fun in their work environment. Our CEO, for instance, started work in Dan Murphy's with Dan Murphy kind of on the shop floor. So I think that kind of flows through into how the business operates as well.
And you essentially, my understanding is you have been on a transformation journey. You are on one, and it's far from complete. So perhaps talk to me about where you were, where you are, and where you're heading.
Yeah, so I joined the business 3 years ago. We set up a function called Endeavour X, which was essentially our digital transformation kind of incubator team.
Yep. That
pulled together the analytical resources, the tech resources, delivery resources, etc., across the business and brought them into one place. Okay. And one of the use cases that we, as part of that, was personalization, which is essentially a big data problem.
Yes, okay.
We were doing it in the context of digital transformation and the context of how we offer the relevant offers to customers.
Yep.
And at that point in time, we probably had around about 10 analysts. And I remember I recruited the head of analytics into our business. And I said to Rob when he joined that we'd probably get to about 20 or 25, maybe 30. And how do you feel about managing that? And he was quite comfortable. Now we're up to 90 to 100 in the analytics space. So we've gone on a massive ramp up over the last couple of years. Personalization has been the thing that we've kind of hung a lot of that recruitment off. But around about 6 months ago, we decided to spin off what we're calling data-led transformation as its own function within our strategy team. And that was the attempt really to go, well, we've put the foundations in place. We've got the talent, or we've got some of the talent we need in the business. But what are the really high-value use cases that we want to go after as a business? How do we actually make Endeavour a data-led business? How do we make decisions based on data rather than on gut feel? Or how do we bring those two together, I guess, across the empathy and understanding you get from kind of human input, and then the decisions you get from AI and computers, and bring the two together. And that resulted in us setting up this new function, which it's been on paper, it's been in place for 6 months. The reality is at the moment there's me plus 2 people, and we're on a significant mobilization and scaling up strategy as we speak. So we're trying to get 40 people in by the end of this financial year, and probably recruit another 60 in next year. Steve, who's the CEO, is a huge believer in data and its power to unlock the business basically, and to help us on our transformation journey.
Where has his belief originated from?
Some of that from within Woolworths, and Woolworths have done, they've been on this journey for a bit longer than we have. But also exposure to things like we've been doing Harvard training over the last year or so, and actually working with some world-class leaders from Harvard on what should a digital transformation look like, what are the big players overseas and here doing, and leveraging some of that understanding. So it's kind of he's been on that journey as well. And personalization unlocked. So we worked with an external partner. We built a personalization engine in about 9 months, start to finish, and it's delivering 8-figure numbers a year in terms of benefits. So it's a fairly significant
straight tangible
quantifiable
benefits.
Quantifiable sales benefits. And that's why we're, I guess, going again on other use cases, which potentially even deliver more value because they're much more focused on the back end parts of our business, our merchandising and operations, where there's some fairly significant levers you can pull. I think we're still scraping the surface on personalization, and I think it's probably an infinite journey in some respects. I think you can always, I guess, throw more data at it. You can always learn more about your customers. You can always understand what motivates them and put the right offers in front of them. You can expand across multiple channels. So we've started with marketing channels, email in the main, by expanding out into every time you log into the Dan Murphy's app, every time you hit the website, you get personalized content and personalized offers for you. And then what we've also done, I guess, through that journey is understand what are the foundations that we need as well from a technical and capability perspective. So have we got the right platform? Have we got the right tools? Have we got the right people? And how do we start to then apply, I'm going to say those people to different problems to solve across the business? So we were pretty conscious that what we didn't want to do was partner with somebody who then took all of that IP with them. We wanted to retain the capability and the individuals in the business after they left. So it was part building an engine, but part teaching people how to use that engine so they could then deploy on other things.
Let's get back to you in terms of, from a leadership perspective, it can't all be luck. Probably only 95%. So what's your role really in the simplest terms? How do you steer the ship?
Yeah, so I've always seen my role, even when I was kind of, I guess, on the tools, as being a translator between the business and analytics teams. So you normally, and a friend of mine talks about a consumption gap, which is you've got the business on one side of the bridge and you've got the analytics team on the other side of the bridge. So I've always seen my role as bringing people to the middle of the bridge or walking to the middle of the bridge myself and helping people translate and to work through, well, this is what the analytics are telling us. Okay, well, how does that work in a business context? And my pet hate was always naive analytics. So somebody in the analytics team would do a piece of analytics, but the business would already know about it, or they'd know about it, but they didn't really know what to do next.
Right, okay.
And that's kind of, I guess, where I found myself back to now in some respects, which is, I don't produce any analytics. I don't actually own any of the inputs into how we do analytics. I actually own the outputs. So my job is to work with the business to identify what are the priority use cases that we want to go after, help them size and quantify those and work out how they would land a change in the business, then bring that back to the analytics teams and actually work cross-functionally across analytics, engineering, business users, marketing teams potentially even, and actually helps and solve those problems. And then my job is to just unblock things. So, we build cross-functional teams to solve problems. And then I think it's the Steve Jobs adage, right? You basically put them in, you get out of the way and let them get on with it. And that's the way we try to operate. And then my job is when it gets stuck is to be the snowplow that kind of helps unblock those blockages.
There's a whole heap of challenges in there, but in terms of the key challenges within that, I think again you and I have done some sort of preparation, and you talk about sort of supply and demand challenges, and there's multiple opportunities, multiple case studies, but you've got there's always scarce resource and how you deploy it. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, so I think just to give you some context, when we first, so we've been up and running for 6 months now. And through that process, we've kind of gone quite widely across the business, not completely exhaustive, but we've gone as wide as we can do to go, okay, what are the problems that you want us to solve? And we identified 275 on the first pass of that. So if you put, say, 10 people on each of those, that's 2,750 people.
Sorry, the 275, how did you sort of curate those problems, or how did you procure them for the business?
So workshops, individual conversations, workshops, some work we've done previously with external consultants as well, just to identify where the opportunity areas were. And then just, I guess, hard graft of going out and actually working with people on what their problems were and that they needed us to solve. So,
but sorry, you're essentially crowdsourcing without fear or favour problems, for want of a better word, across the organisation.
Without favour, there was quite a lot of fear. But that gave us, I guess, the baseline to go, what's the demand?
No favour whatsoever, just fear. Yeah.
But also to go, well, how do we prioritise these things? Because you're not going to bring in 2,000 people, right? Even an organisation our size to do data science. So we pared that back and pared it back and pared it back and got down to kind of 40, which we thought really could move the dial. Because some of these are multi-million-dollar potential opportunities.
Absolutely.
So I guess then you've sorted out your demand, right? Or more or less, you've kind of gone, well, yes, we've got demand, but
we've got demand, yeah.
And then I guess the supply side of it, we're in the same race, I guess, that everybody else is, which is what's the race for talent, and how do you identify not just data scientists, although they're really scarce resources, but analysts, engineers, even people within the business, I guess, within the merge teams and operations teams who can play those roles in the team within the squads that we operate. Developers, because we're built in some of these cases, we're building tools. But I think we've got a pretty good setup in terms of how we operate with cross-functional squads that we deploy, where we can we can bring like-minded individuals with different skill sets together. So you co-locate as much as you can do in a virtual world, at least. Engineers, analysts, data scientists, business people, designers, etc., and you create a squad with all of those different mix of skills.
Okay. Yep.
And that's worked wonders. But it is a race, I guess, to find the right talent, and especially the talent with the kind of, I guess, the power skills that you need. So, and it comes back to the analogy of the bridge, I guess. You need people who are prepared to kind of cross the bridge. You need people who are prepared to go and have the conversation with the business. You need people who don't want to spend their whole life in a dark room coding, but actually want to understand the problem and actually want to understand how to solve it. So I guess it's problem solving, communication, commerciality.
But it's interesting you use the phrase power skills, because I'll be completely honest, I had only really stumbled across this phrase in the last few weeks, and it seems to be gaining traction.
Yeah, I think...
What are they? I'm
obviously fairly good at picking up bullshit. It's probably part of it. But also, I think one of the challenges when you've got some, like, I guess the split in the past has always been hard skills, which is, coding, technology, R, Python, SQL, whatever. And then you've got the soft skills have been everything else wrapped around it.
Yes.
And it's almost been in some roles that the hard skills are the stuff that are really useful, and the softer skills are just the fluff, I guess, that kind of fits around it. But actually I think if you rebadge it and rename it and call it something a little bit more kind of tangible, but also with a bit of oomph behind it.
And a bit more aspirational.
Then it actually says these things are important. Yeah. And if you look at anybody leading, at least in analytics context, they're all people who communicate really well. They're all people who can contextualize the analytics and put it in the context of the business and show them the value it adds. So not just talking about the analytics, but also talking about the value it delivers to the business. So I think that to me is that's the big unlock for people wanting to accelerate their careers and grow in seniority is how do you articulate what you're doing, how it's adding value to the business.
And in terms of the shift that's happening in the market then, or this requirement to blend, let's call them hard skills for a moment, hard analytical skills or technical skills with the power skills, if that's a shift, then do sufficient number of individuals even exist? Are they going into the universities? Are the right personality types going into what are perceived to be deeply analytical courses?
I think that's probably the big challenge is how do you identify, or even how do you partner with universities, and how do you partner earlier on potentially in the value chain as it were. So how do you find people when they're starting at the university careers? How do you make sure that organizations partner with universities to make sure the syllabus is kind of the right one? I think one of the hedges, I guess, is that by having cross-functional teams, you can put more analytical people with more business savvy people and partner them together. So it does give you the ability to kind of hedge your bets. But I think it is a challenge that businesses are going to increasingly face. So it is then going to be about how do we develop capability ourselves. We do have something like 20,000 in-store employees. Well, there must be people who work in our store network who've got a background in computer science or maths or software development. How do we bring those people through into our organization? How do we identify the right partners? How do we work with universities, etc., to make sure that we've got a conveyor belt almost of talent coming in? So rather than recruiting for specific roles, we recruit for capabilities and we build that strength in depth. And that's something we're working through at the moment and developing strategies for.
Now, another probably naive question, but I quite like these. In your capacity, are there limitations to your understanding of what is driving the whole piece, the whole data piece? And if so, what are they?
I think I don't understand very much of what we do, if I'm perfectly honest. I think one of my... I'm
going to leave that in.
you can leave it in. One of my...
People will know already, presumably. So
100%, yeah. I think part of... Very, very definitely. So technology is moving at a pace which most people can't keep up with. So yeah, we're deploying some fairly, I guess, cutting edge technology with cloud and with GCP and a lot of other things. But there will be companies who've gone straight past that into whatever the next big thing is. Yep. So that technology is one. I think skills and keeping up to date with even what the latest skills are that people have got. So when I started this, I coded in SQL, and that was pretty much it. That's the only coding language I know. And I was, you've got Python, you've got R, you've got a multitude of languages that I've never even heard of, Scala, etc. as well. So I think keeping up is tough, but I think the challenge is you don't actually need to. Again, if you distribute decision making across enough people, then you get the person who knows data science to focus on what the data science skills we need. You get the technology lead to understand what's the technology platform we need. We work really closely with partners like Google and Databricks and others who are right at the forefront of these things.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm pretty good at asking questions, I guess. And I know what I don't know, and I'm quite happy to go and ask somebody and find out. And again, I think it comes back to that modesty thing of I know that I don't know a lot of this stuff, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to be an expert in these things. I'm here to connect the business and the analytics teams together.
It's quite good to have real world examples of the 40 use cases that you've distilled it down to. Is there one way you could bring it to life slightly in real terms as to what it entails and so for example, if people were joining you, what they might be real world focused upon?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest single thing we're working on at the moment, and we're in the early kind of, I guess, discovery stages of this, is how do we optimize our promotional calendar? So we've got two brands. So we've got Dan's and BWS. We've got 20,000 products roughly that could be promoted or not at any point in time.
Yeah, wow.
If you try to say, well, how do I optimize that calendar across the year? It's about 1 trillion decisions a week to say, okay, well, how do I decide whether Corona's on offer in this brand for what period of time or what offer depth, etc.
Yeah, okay.
And and a trillion decisions takes.
Are people drinking Corona again? Are they?
Maybe a bad example. And it takes I guess more than a couple of spreadsheets and a calculator to calculate 20 trillion different decisions.
Yeah, sure.
And it's well beyond the complexity of most people to calculate. So we're looking at how we optimize that calendar across the year, and you can optimize for multiple different things. You optimize for sales, you can optimize for for footfall, you can optimize for margin, you can optimize for profit,
weather, all sorts of things.
Exactly. And all of those things will come into play. So that's, I guess, one of the core kind of use cases we're looking at. And this is where we talk about there's almost infinite. It's almost an infinite game. There's almost infinite possibilities of what you can do with the data you've got, and that's our tagline and our mission is around infinite possibilities, because there's almost an infinite number of use cases, an infinite amount of data, not an infinite amount of value, because there's a tap out on that at some point, but there's a lot of opportunity that we can explore, and we're only really scratching the surface of it.
So if we have listeners, viewers who are starting a transformation journey, midway through one, contemplating, what would be your advice around embarking on that transformation journey?
Yeah, so I think you can call it luck or you can call it positioning, whatever you want. I think we've been quite fortunate, shall we say, then, in that sponsorship of what we're trying to achieve comes right from the top. Right? So we've already touched on that earlier, is that it's coming from the CEO down.
Yes,
but even when we started this journey 2 or 3 years ago, where there was probably a little bit less of that, the key thing was just start, right? So when we started the personalization journey, we started with a team of 4 people in a corner in Dan Murphy's, and everything we did, we showed value along the way. And some of that was actual dollars value, some of it was response rates improving, some of it was customer satisfaction improving. So how do you measure things are working, and then kind of things snowball from there. There's always a point though at which it gets hard as well. So transformation by its nature is hard, and I think the preferred state of most companies and people is inertia, and to kind of do what they've done and kind of carry on doing that. So you do come up across at least passive resistance, if not forceful resistance. So you have to just keep going, I think. So start and keep going are probably the 2 things. And that's where I guess the resilience and mental health thing comes in again, is you kind of occasionally, if you're in transformation roles, you have to keep going even if other people are trying to pull you back. And I think that's where the mental kind of toughness, resilience, and ability to adapt actually comes in pretty well. When there's 2 or 3 of you trying to push a transformation agenda, and 27,997 who are trying to push against it. Part of my job is also then, I guess, to help the organization build capability, data literacy, and awareness of the things that we build. So no point building a tool if nobody can use it.
No, of course.
If people don't understand data in the business, there's no point. There's no point building the best data team in the world if the business isn't ready to receive that from a literacy perspective. So I think there is a balance there.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think you said to me earlier on today when we were talking, 4th piece of advice, don't listen to my advice. But I think there's something in there for everybody. If people want to reach out to you through LinkedIn, whether it's around, potentially wanting to talk about opportunities with Endeavour Group, whether it's to go for a run, quick 25K. Nico, who I was speaking to, he likes a quick 20K at lunchtime. He may want to run.
Maybe he's out of my league if he's running 20K in a lunchtime.
No, not at all. Again, you're being modest, I think. Are you happy if they do that through LinkedIn?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite what's the word? I'm quite responsive, I guess. I'm also quite active.
High profile.
High profile is not the right word, but I'm quite active on LinkedIn.
A LinkedIn A-lister we've got here.
I like to have an opinion on things which I post on other people's walls. But I'm approachable through LinkedIn. And there are opportunities currently at Endeavour. I don't actually know what the website is, but if you type Endeavour careers into Google, then there are numerous currently live vacancies around data science and engineering and analytics.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise. I've got one more thing to do before we break though. So Adam Morton, when he was on a few weeks ago, recommended a book. So I've been tasked with carrying on the tradition.
He gave me a copy of a book, yes.
So this is a book that I was recommended a couple of weeks ago, and it's one of those books where there's not many books you kind of. Number one, I don't like business books, frankly. I get about 2 chapters in normally and down tools.
Is this a re-gift in that case?
No. I've got it's brand new. Look, it hasn't come out of the packet yet. So I downloaded it on my Kindle or other reading device a couple of weeks ago. And it's one of those books where, number one, you can dip in and dip out of it. So you don't have to read it cover to cover, which I like.
Perfect.
But also it's kind of started to make me reevaluate how I do some of the things in work. So it's called Measure What Matters. It's based on kind of understandings from Google, IBM, and a few others. And I find
it's in an audio compliant crinkling like that.
But yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating, and it's been recommended reading for my boss, who's our strategy director, and half of our exec over the last couple of weeks as well. So.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate that. Measure What Matters, the simple idea that drives 10x growth.
Yeah.
Who doesn't need a bit of 10x growth in their life? And the other thing is, along with this and Adam's book, I've now my eBay bookstores really starting to flourish. So that's no, thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries. It's a really good read. I could really recommend it. And to anybody else on who's listening as well, the 10 people who are listening, the 10 copies of the book.
Well, perhaps there'll be 100 once the book's finished. And I found the 10x growth in that. That's fantastic. Thank you. And again, it's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed that. Thanks,
pleasure.
Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. This podcast was brought to you by Ember, creating talent solutions in technology, transformation, data and analytics, and project services across Australia. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe and share. If you'd like to get in touch with the Ember team, simply send an email, visit the website, or connect on LinkedIn. Contact details can be found in the description. See you next time.